You know what I mean? Like, they're just not going to invest. Like, people are so busy and have so much stuff going on that, like, they're not going to invest their time sitting into, like, if they're going to take 15 minutes after practice to sit and talk with you, it's because they genuinely care about you. You know what I mean? And if they didn't, they'd probably just yell at you for 30 seconds and move on, right? So I think that's kind of the way I see it, but not to say that's necessarily correct, but that's just kind of from my experience how I would see it.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Masters of the Game. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing you to Drew Shore. And I want to brag on him a little bit, as I always do at the beginning of these, but fascinating background, Denver guy, born here, pretty much raised here, left home at age 13 to go pursue his hockey dreams. And his hockey dreams came true, right? Being able to play in the NHL. Drew is a current sports agent. We'll talk a little bit about that today. Obviously played professional hockey in the NHL. He was drafted in the second round, 44th overall by the Florida Panthers in 2009. Played for Florida, Calgary, and the Carolina Hurricanes, and also played overseas as well. And what stuck out to me, which I think is really cool, he and I talked about before this, was he actually played in Zurich, Switzerland, where I spent 3 years of my life as well. So we had that kind of common connection. He also attended the University of Denver. And I could go on and on about Drew, about just the accomplishments, but I want to climb into his head a little bit and hear some stories and chat mindset and mental toughness and hockey and all those things. And I know you want to hear that too. So without further ado, Drew, welcome, and appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I have not met anyone else in the Denver area who spent 3 years in Zurich, Switzerland. So that's pretty funny, and we share a little bond there.
Yeah, a unique thing, and it was interesting. So we were there, well, this is about 2003 to 2006. And that was the time, Drew, when the NHL lockout happened. And so all the NHL guys came over to Europe, like all over Europe, Russia, all over internationally, right? And so we got to see all these NHL guys playing in these kind of small stadiums along with the international players. It was phenomenal. These small stadiums, right? It's just that the environment's so different over there.
Yeah, I think I talked to a lot of guys who have played over there during those lockouts, and they just, they had the best time, because for those guys, when you get the experience living in Davos, Switzerland, and those guys were like skiing after practice and having a pretty good time. So I think that, obviously it was a little disappointing for them. The NHL wasn't playing, but they enjoyed themselves as much as they could.
Yeah, I think there are worse places to be in the world. But a question I always like to kind of ask at the beginning, as you look at your, collegiate professional career, what's one of the greatest memories you have from your playing days?
Some of the greatest memories I had, from the collegiate standpoint, being able to play with my brother. So I have 3 younger brothers. We're all very close, best friends. I was able to actually play with Nick at DU, and then he was able to play with Quinton, and then my youngest brother ended up going somewhere else. But that was definitely a highlight. Got to play with Nick a little bit in Europe when I knew my career was going to be over towards the end for like 5 games with one of his friends who owns a team. So that was a highlight. Just scoring my first NHL goal was something you dream about a lot as a kid. That was cool. And I was able to meet just so many good people and made so many lifelong friends that I'm still very close with today. I think that was a highlight as well.
That's awesome. Well, and growing up with the brothers and stuff, was it a hyper competitive household from just in general, or just hockey, or what was that like?
No, in general. My mom is one of the most competitive people you'll meet. She was a professional tennis player for a while, actually a collegiate swimmer as well. So she was very competitive. My dad was a lacrosse and soccer player, so that was kind of in our blood from an early age. But it was one of those things where even like as competitive as we were, like in hockey, we had this weird thing where like we were never competitive with each other in hockey, but it was pretty much anything outside of hockey, from video games to golf to anything else. I would say like watching the success that my brothers had within the game was one of probably also my biggest accomplishments, just that knowing that I kind of played a small role in that. And it was cool just to see the success. Nick's still playing. Nick had the best career. Nick played 300 or 400 games in the NHL, mostly in LA, still playing in Europe. Quentin and Baker are no longer playing, but we remain the best of friends today. And that's definitely one of the highlights of not only my childhood, but my life today.
That's so cool. Well, and, I want to dive into your path a little bit because, at age 13, you left home, which those listening, like the hockey world is just, it can be a very different path. Like we were talking before, there's like multiple paths to get there. But leaving home at age 13, that's pretty young, right? But walk me through like why you made that decision, where you went, and how do you think that shifted the trajectory of like you being able to make it?
Well, it's super crazy. Like I have a 6 and 3-year-old daughter now, and I could not imagine possibly letting my 6-year-old daughter, when she turns 13, get out of the house. But like you mentioned, Colorado hockey's a lot different now. Like now there's all these AAA programs, and it's funny now because some of my friends run them, but now there's kids from like Arizona, Texas, some of these states who move here to play hockey. And when I was growing up here, there was no AAA. There wasn't a lot of ice time. There wasn't a lot of rinks. And I was just determined from a really young age that like I was going to play in the NHL and nothing was going to stop me. So for me, that was like, I felt like I had to move and just go somewhere where I was able to skate on the ice more, where I was able to play against better players, and literally like begged my parents, because they weren't very fond of it at first, letting me go. And eventually I kind of pulled the like, I don't know, immature 13-year-old brat, like don't ruin my dreams card enough that I think they were finally sick and tired of hearing it and just said, all right, get out of here. So that was kind of my journey. And like I said, it's cool to see how much hockey's grown here now.
Yeah, it's vastly different, right? I mean, what Avalanche moved in 95 into Colorado, and then it boomed from there. But just the growth is tremendous, even over the last 5-10 years. It continues.
Yeah, it's been cool to see. And there's been a lot of former NHL guys who have now started programs that are like really successful. And like I said, it's just amazing. Like I would have never have thought kids would have ever moved to Colorado to play hockey. And now you got kids coming from all over.
So wild. So you moved to Canada, and then you moved for a couple of years. You moved to Michigan for a couple of years. What was the path kind of after that? Was it straight to the draft from the team in Michigan, or how'd that work?
Yeah, so in Michigan, there's a program called the National Team Development Program, which I think a lot of people give credit for, like USA Hockey in general. They basically take the top 20, 25 juniors and seniors in high school and basically put them on one team, and you play a really competitive schedule. And it's funny, I actually think about those days sometimes, because I mean, you'd go to school from like 7 to 12, and then you'd be at the rink from like 1 to 8 p.m. and then like come home, do like a little bit of homework or do something and go to bed. And I mean, those were hard days, but I felt like I worked harder there than I probably like did you know what I mean? Like they force you to just develop like a work ethic and stuff that like I think outlasts like a lot of people even at the professional level. So it's this really cool program, and guys end up getting drafted. The second year of that, I was fortunate enough to get drafted by Florida. And then being able to come home and play at DU was cool because I'd been away for so long. So it was like my parents got to come to all my games. My grandparents were at my games. They were bringing their friends. So it was pretty special to be able to come back and play here.
That's amazing. Well, so when you look at that development program, because ultimately what I'm trying to get at, Drew, is like what was so special about you, and maybe special about like the players that you competed against like at that development program that made it to the NHL? What's different? What's unique? Is it the work ethic? Is it like what are the ingredients, if you had to say like this is the secret to get to NHL?
I think a lot of it is just like, so you're putting like literally like the 20 best players who come from all over in one environment on one ice. So it like drives such a competitive nature, like from day one. Like, and a lot of these guys, like if you're the best player on your team in Denver, right? Like I could have not worked that hard during practice. I would have been the best player by far. I would have had a coach who probably wouldn't have held me very accountable, but you kind of go there and you get thrown into this ultra competitive environment where it's like all these kids are really good. So it's like, if you're not playing well at practice one day, like you might not play as much on the weekend. So it just kind of raises the level of competition so high. I mean, now, like I said, it's like funny looking back, but I remember like during workouts and stuff, like there'd be guys doing like these like treadmill tests where you like put the treadmill on 10 incline, 10 speed, and they'd like face the treadmills against each other. And it would literally be like a war, like first guy to like say like to get off. But I mean, it gets to a point where like your legs, so it's just like, I mean, for kids that age, like I don't think they can find that competitive of an environment anywhere else. And I think that that's really what like, and then on top of that, right, like the resources they provide, USA Hockey provides these kids from a strength and nutrition, a training, a power skating, a diet, nutrition. So, I mean, you're kind of thrown in this ultra competitive environment and given all the resources to be successful. And I think that like every year now they have like 5 or 10 of those kids off those teams play in the NHL and are some of the best players in the NHL. So it was a pretty good idea to start that program, and it's had a lot of success.
Yeah. Well, do you think that competitive nature like is the differentiator? Because I guess when you're playing with those 20-25 guys, right? Did some people have it and some people didn't? Like, meaning, did some people like have that drive and want and desire, and those are the guys that made it, or was it like kind of all over the board of?
Well, it's funny because all 20 of those guys, I would say, had that, because it's like basically like 20 or 25 of these like 17-year-old alpha males being thrown into one rink, right? So
Yes.
Then it's like, obviously some kids are better than others, but I think a lot of it that I talk about with kids now is, I mean, a couple of those kids play in the NHL at like 18, but it's still a 3-4 year window for a lot of those kids. So a lot of it is like from a development, like, I mean, those kids who went into that program, they got a little bit better each year for the next 4 or 5 years, like ended up making the NHL, and most of them had good careers. But it was like, there's definitely kids who, like, even from a development standpoint, like hit puberty early and were the best kid at 17, but then didn't really develop the next couple of years, and then it's hard. So I think that one of the most important things, even from there, is, like I said, I mean, most guys have a 3-4 year window. It's guys who just kept taking a big step to get better, get better, get better.
Yeah. No, I love that perspective, because I think that's such a huge thing, right? About how consistently can you keep doing the work to continue to develop? And
yeah, because I mean, as an athlete, right? I mean, obviously it comes to a certain extent in age, but if you continually are getting better and that curve never stops, like, you're going to eventually find a way to have some success.
Very true. That's interesting. Well, what are your thoughts on this? Because when you go to a program like that, obviously you have great support, great like tools, coaches, things like that, right? Like you mentioned, great resources. But ultimately, like, every player has to make that decision that like they're going to buy in and do the work. Like, where does that come from for you personally? And what advice would you give kids who are like wavering a little bit or hesitating on like kind of going all in on that? Because it sounds like you did.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it comes down to like guys who are actually like able to find a way to like mentally enjoy the work are the ones who are going to outlast, right? Because it's like anyone, if they're feeling great that day, can like go to the rink and like work hard and stuff like that. But I mean, guys who truly like enjoy kind of like the process of like getting better and are able to like find a way, because like if you don't enjoy the work, it comes to a point where eventually like you're going to burn out or not be able to give that same effort. So I think that like there's just certain guys, right, who just like have this ability, who just like loved like the day in, day out grind of going to the weight room, of skating, of doing this. And I think that those guys like just have a little bit of a different mindset where they don't view it necessarily like, oh, fuck, like I have to go work out today. It's like, oh, I get to train today. Like, this is great. So I think that there's a little bit of that. I think that you can kind of tell that with certain kids, some kids who just enjoy like the process of getting better. I think that, like I said, like eventually it's gonna turn into more of work at some point. But the longer, I mean, there's guys in the NHL, right, who still like play the game like they're 10 years old playing on a pond. And I feel like those guys are able to have longer careers.
Yes. Yeah, it's when I interviewed Pavel Francouz a couple weeks ago, and he talked about how even sometimes he had to remind himself of like, imagine like if I wanted to take a day off, if I walked to some like beer league goalie and said, hey, I'm taking a day off. You want to do this? Like, you want to be in goal tonight? And he just imagined their face lighting up and like the joy. And he's like, that helped ground me in like, man, I get to play a fun game. Like that love, because it can be a grind. It's challenging. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know him personally, but that's an unbelievable perspective, right? Like, I mean, there's goalies who would probably like cut off their pinky finger to play a period in the NHL. And I mean, he's probably coming off like 3 games and 5 nights and traveled and is exhausted and is like, fuck, I have to go play again. Like, I can't wait for my day off. But it is nice to kind of find something, the way to ground yourself, to be like, hey, like, I mean, I'm sure him as a kid, I think he's from like the Czech Republic maybe, but like, I'm sure he would have done anything as a kid to play 1 period in the NHL, right, as a goalie. So, yeah, it's obviously a great way to kind of ground yourself, and he was able to have a great career probably because of that.
That's so cool. Yeah. What's the biggest difference in your mind between the collegiate level and then making that jump to the professional level? What was the biggest difference for you?
I think it's like, from a strictly hockey standpoint, it's like people don't realize that like it's not like when people say like the NHL is a fast game, like there's very fast skaters. Guys can skate fast in college. Guys can skate fast in the American League. But the biggest thing that separates the NHL is like the speed that plays happen at is so fast. So it's like your decision-making time is so much like shorter. You're like the puck is moving. So it's like you have to be able to like think and process plays at such a higher rate. And I think that like if you look at like there's a lot of guys in NHL who can skate fast, but just like for a very simple analogy, like Connor McDavid is able to skate fast, think fast, stick handle fast, and do everything else at that high of a level, right? So he's able to like process plays. Like most guys can skate in one direction very fast, can't really stick handle or think doing the same thing, but he's kind of able to do all those things at the same time, which just makes him one of the, if not the greatest player ever.
That's a really interesting point. Because we forget sometimes that they talk about the physicality of as you progress up the ranks of any sport, right? Physicality increases, speed increases, but oftentimes we forget to talk about the decision-making process that has to come along with it.
Yeah, it's just like, I mean, if you're a D-man and you go back to retrieve a puck on a breakout in the NHL, like you have like half a second, milliseconds to like decide what you're going to do with it, right? And it's like guys who are able to play a long time make a lot more good decisions in those situations than bad decisions, right? And so I think that it's just something that, like I said, doesn't get talked about probably quite as much. Like you said, other things get talked about, but just like the rate and speed, especially now too, the game is just getting even faster and faster now. So it's like, it's fun to watch. And I mean, it's cool to see where the game's going. And I mean, I think that more and more people are starting to become a fan of it as a result.
Absolutely. Well, and are there ways in your mind to like increase that decision-making process? Does it come with time and experience and being around those good players? Are there
a little bit. I mean, I think that like, and I think that like that was something like going back to like the national development program. Like I could have been a 17-year-old kid playing on a AAA team here so I wouldn't have had to make those decisions as quickly. But it was like every single day I was playing with those kids who were so good that you're almost forced to make them every day. So when you do get into a game, it was kind of like riding a bike from that standpoint. Whereas like sometimes like for random weekends, if guys would get hurt, they would take like another good player from a different team. And you could see even as some of those kids were better than some other players, but like they struggled a little bit initially just because it's like they're not used to that pace and kind of speed of play right off the hop.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's you and I are, I don't know, aligned on this thought, but it goes back to that old saying, like, it's all who you surround yourself with, right? And not every player is going to get an opportunity at the development center, right? And have that, but it's how do you put yourself in a position where you're creating those moments where you have to make a quick decision, right? Being intentional with the practice as best you can in the environment you're in.
Yeah, I mean, I was just talking about this with someone like now as I'm trying to figure out kind of the next phase and chapters in my life, right? It's like I was talking to someone like, you kind of become such a product of your environment, both good and bad. It's like, you know what I mean? You hang out with a bunch of people who are uber successful. And the next thing you know, like you're striving to be like that. If you hang out with a bunch of people who are a high school kid making really bad decisions, you're probably going to lead to make more bad decisions. So I think that that's kind of something that I've been a little bit kind of focused on now, because my whole life I was never able to kind of choose which environments I was always on this team or that team, and the game was this. But now that I have a little more freedom, with just different choices and stuff. So it's just interesting to try and navigate that kind of new world for me.
So very true. Who's one of the best teammates you've had over the years, and what made that person such a good teammate?
Fuck, I was such a suitcase. I played on so many teams that I was able to have a lot of good teammates. There's actually a guy who I represent now, actually, who's still playing, named Garrett Wilson, who came to my wedding as one of my best friends. I would say he would be a guy that would come to mind as just the ultimate teammate. He's had a very good career, and he's still getting paid very well to kind of show the young kids kind of how to be a pro and stuff like that. And I think that certain guys I feel like are just kind of the ultimate team guys. And I think that there's a lot of guys who act like they are, you know what I mean? But like there's certain guys who are just naturally above and beyond in terms of leaders and teammates, and he was one of them.
Yeah. Did he do anything special? I mean, was it like a caring for the team or just encouragement? Or
I think he was one of those guys that like always was just like, he's just a guy you'd want to go to battle with every day, whether it was like on the ice, I played with him a lot in the minors. So whether it was on a Sunday in Rockford, Ohio, or, you know what I mean? Even to this day, I felt like if I really needed something, I could call him no matter what that is, and like he would pick up the phone in 2 seconds and just kind of be there for me. So I think he's a guy that is someone who I'd say consider like a close friend. And I think a lot of that just because like the trust that people have for him on the ice also goes off the ice. And I think that he's just an unbelievable human.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think that's an underrated skill as well. Like, I think it's cliche to be like, oh, be a great teammate, but it's like the power of that and the influence you have. And when you go to battle,
Yeah, I also think too, I think from a development standpoint, my brother was able to have a long career in the NHL, and I think a lot of that is because he was a great teammate. And I think that, like, unless if you're in the 1% of the 1%, like if you're a first line player, you can kind of get away. Like you're going to have a long career, right? Regardless of whether you're a good or bad teammate. But there's not a huge delta in talent or anything else between like third and fourth line guys around the league. And some of those guys are allowed to stick around for 15, 20 years, and other guys play for 1 year and are done. And I think that one of the reasons I think a lot of people would say my brother had success is just because he was such a great teammate. And he's a guy who, like, all of the like elite players want to hang out, not even really on the ice, but just off the ice. So I think that, like, I try and teach that with kids, that like being a good teammate can have a direct effect on the length of your career, on the money you make during your career, and all of those things. And I think a lot of kids don't understand that, and even I didn't really understand that for a long time. But now that I kind of am working on the other side, I see it. But I think that, like, being a good teammate can have a direct length on the success of your career as well.
Yeah, I'm reminded of that as you're talking, that saying that, a high tide rises all boats, right? So I think as we become better teammates, and again, we don't have to be best friends with everyone. I think that's misconceived sometimes. Like, you got to be best friends with. No, that's not the point. It's like, how do you have respect? How do you have caring? Like, how do you elevate? Like, make the tide go up so that everyone comes with you.
Yeah,
it's a special skill to have, right? But you can work on too. That's a beautiful thing. That's the cool thing about it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree completely.
Well, okay, so we talked about teammates. I want to talk coaches for a minute. Who's one of the, most influential coaches you had? I'm asking some big questions, Drew. I'm making you think about all these teams you've been on. But,
yeah. This is the issue of being on so many teams.
I know, but who's one coach that just stands out to you, and what did he do to, just have that positive influence on you?
So I think going back to like those coaches that I was able to have at the National Development Program, they forced us to like behave on the ice and even off the ice, but like they forced, like, even from like a practice detail standpoint, like they held us to such a high standard that I felt like the rest of my career I was never really fazed by that stuff as a result of getting that at that National Development Program. Like, not to get like too hockey technical on you here, because I know this is, but it's like giving guys bad passes like was not real, like not acceptable. Like as a high school kid, like that's just like, you know what I mean? And like, if you did give a guy a bad pass, you'd hear about it. And then, so, I mean, you just got like your day to day was used to like making good passes. So then like, I'm sure a lot of guys never had that, and then went to college or professional and threw a couple of bad passes, then had a coach fly off the handle. So I think that I was really fortunate from a coaching standpoint just to get that very early in my career. And I felt like I was held to such a high standard at a young age that the rest of my career was a little bit easier in terms of that, from that perspective.
Yes. Okay. So I love this high standard discussion. Like, I think it's needed more than ever in just society today. I won't go down that path, but when we talk about holding high standards, there are some kids who, it's professional too, so like men and women, but like that react very negatively to that when they get feedback and hear about that, versus ones who like thrive in that environment. And maybe you've seen that in like players that you represent, or players that you've coached, stuff like that, and players that you've, again, been on teams with. How do you coach people through, like, because again, I've been there too, right? A different sport, but you do something that's not ideal, you're going to hear about it. And it's all about, what do you do with that? Like, if a coach yells at you or says something sternly, or gives you a pat on the back, it's like, what do you do with that information? And if it's something negative, it's like, I'm going to take this and use it as fuel forward, where some kids want to quit and give up and do that sort of thing. What are your thoughts around like, how can kids like overcome that or shift that kind of narrative in their head?
Well, I think one of the ways they can shift the narrative is like, I do feel now like that I see that like a lot of coaches who don't care, like are not going to take the time to really invest their effort into kids. So I think like I would start with like a little bit of a softer conversation with the kid, just being like, okay, the reason that this coach is doing this because he actually believes in you and cares about you. Because if he didn't, he wouldn't say anything to you. So that is why he's holding you to a high standard. But then like to kind of not be as soft, it's like if you're not able to like take this, learn from it and get better, like you're not going to have a chance to be successful in sports. Right. And so it's like, so I think that like you see a lot of kids, like I said, those kids who end up being able to be successful are able to take that criticism, realize that like, okay, even if they disagree with it, like realize that like that, because I mean, coaches are wrong, right? Like not to say like coaches are wrong all the time. It's not to say that like that's right, but you have to be able to find a way to take that, understand where they're coming from and move forward. And also not let like, something we talk about a lot is like, not letting like one mistake turn into a bad game, not letting one bad game turn into two bad games. And I think that was something that I probably wasn't great at during my career. Like when I was playing well, I was on top of the world. And when I wasn't, it was bad. And I think that like that kind of not only burns you out from like an energy standpoint, because like guys who are able to like play for 20 years, I feel like most of them are like very even keeled. Like they're going to have a great game. They're not going to be on top of like, this is just like clocking in for work, clocking out. Like it's the day of business. And it's like some days are going to be better than others, but no matter what, they're going to have the same routine and they're going to show up the next day and do a good job. So I think that like getting like too emotionally high and too low is something that I did a lot, and it just like drains you and just like, you know what I mean? It's just exhausting during the season and can make it very difficult.
That's very true. No, I like that. I agree 100%. Like, even though sometimes a delivery can be better, right? And I know that as a parent too. If you start from that place of like, they're saying this because they actually care, that's like, I love that because that's like step one of like, they don't hate you.
Yeah, well, exactly. And it's like, it's like, you know what I mean? Like they're just not going to invest. Like people are so busy and have so much stuff going on that like, they're not going to invest their time sitting into like, if they're going to take 15 minutes after practice to sit and talk with you, it's because they genuinely care about you. You know what I mean? And if they didn't, they'd probably just yell at you for 30 seconds and move on, right? So I think that's kind of the way I see it, but not to say that's necessarily correct, but that's just kind of from my experience how I would see it.
Yeah. No, I have a similar experience too. I had one athlete I interviewed years ago, basketball player, and he said he got yelled at a lot. And he goes, I realized after the fact that I'd get really mad about it and lash out at it. And he said, I realized later on that the reason he was yelling, and again, not condoning yelling at all. Yeah. Because I finally realized he cared. That's why he was on me. He saw the potential and he chose to go a different path and stop playing basketball altogether. Right. So we all have those choices of how we look at it. And again, coaching can improve too, as I try to improve.
I mean, that's something that you'll laugh, but that's something I was surprised about. I always thought as a kid, like when you get to like college or semi-professional or the NHL, that like all these coaches are going to be great. And then you kind of get there and you realize that like even at the highest levels, like there's a lot of bad coaches.
Yeah. Everybody's trying to figure it out and improve. Right. And
yeah, exactly. Right. But I think it's just a little bit of like being naive. You always think like, oh, all NHL coaches are like great coaches. And then like you get there and you're like, this guy has no idea what he's talking about.
Not so much. Yeah.
Yeah. It's fake it till you make it, I guess. So
yeah, exactly. That's so wild. Okay. So I want to talk the mental side here in a minute, but I have a question before that. Playing in the NHL versus internationally, I mean, ice size is different, right? It's bigger overseas. I don't know if people are aware of that. A bigger sheet of ice, a little more space, stuff like that. What's the biggest difference with playing like here in the North America versus overseas? Is the game different? Is the mentality different? Like what's that like?
Yeah, so they're actually starting to move more overseas rinks smaller just because they've started to realize that like a lot of their young kids and stuff, like it's a disadvantage then when they have to come play on the small ice in the NHL. But the game is different. So skating is more important because the ice is bigger.
Yes.
Kind of what we talked about earlier, you have a lot more time to make decisions, so it makes it like a little bit like of a different game. And then I would say too, like puck possession is just more important because like it's easier to hang on to, so it's a little bit more like soccer like rather than like getting the red line when you have pressure and dumping it in, a lot of European players will pull it back and just kind of like reset. So I think that those are kind of the three main differences. But I do think that a lot of those European countries, I know they are in like Russia and other places, are starting to move it smaller because even a lot of the international competition, it's smaller, right? So it's a disadvantage for their players to play all year in this and then go play in a world championships and have it be on small ice. So I think they should have just more of a one size, just because like I said, it just kind of makes it easier for everyone. But yeah, like I said, the European ice can be good at sometimes. Like I enjoyed it, but it's also like you're so far from the net too at certain points that like you can play a whole game and not even feel like you were close to a scoring area. So it's funny because it's not that big. I don't even know. It's only like a couple feet on both sides, but it completely changes the dynamic of the game.
Yes. Well, and again, I know a lot of people watching this are not from Colorado area, right? But you go down to the Springs to the training center, and they've got the kind of North American sheet of ice on one side, and they've got the international sheet of ice on the other side. And it is fairly different, right? And
yeah, it's a soccer field.
That's true. But that's interesting though, because I think to your point, puck possession, I love the comparison to soccer too, because it does shift more into possession, which you can absolutely see on a bigger sheet of ice, right? You just have more space.
Yeah, and I think that like you have to be able to obviously skate a little bit better to play on the big ice, just because it's like, I mean, you just got more room to travel, right? So it's like,
yes,
you know what I mean? Like if you can't, you're going to struggle. And I think that like you can kind of get away on smaller ice with being a smarter player who doesn't skate as well, just because there's less room to travel. But yeah, I was never the greatest skater, so I always preferred the small ice, and that was kind of my thing.
I love that. Get in front of the net and get some.
Yeah,
clean up.
Yeah,
right?
you don't have to. Yeah, it's even like too, like when you like have to like finish a check. Not that I was finishing that many checks, but like on the small ice, it's like one extra stride, and on the big ice, it's like two or three. So I felt like from that perspective, that's kind of why I like. I mean, there's obviously a lot more hitting on the small sheet, but yeah, it'll be interesting. I think it's good for the game that they're all going small.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, so I want to shift real quick to the kind of mental side of the game, right? Call it mental toughness or resiliency. I don't know. There's many different phrases to use, right? But talk to me a little about, I don't know, just the importance in your mind of the mental side. Like, what did that mean to you growing up? How has it shifted, over the years as you got to the professional ranks? Did it shift at all? Like, talk to me a little about kind of your thoughts around the mental side.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to my wife earlier this morning about what I was doing today and kind of talked about this podcast, and she laughed just because I feel like I've been asked this question a lot. But I actually personally feel like I didn't have the career that I should have had because I was not I was just mentally not very tough in certain areas or had a bad mindset. And I think that was kind of one of the reasons that I ended up like playing 100 games in NHL rather than 800, just because I struggled with different things from the mental side at different points. And that's why she was laughing that I was coming on a podcast talking mental health, because I definitely could write the book on kind of how not to handle it. So I'm excited to answer any questions you have on this.
Yeah. So if you don't mind sharing, like, is there an example too of like how you handled something that you wish you would have handled differently, like around emotion, like whatever the situation is?
Yeah. Well, so like one of the reasons I was able to have a successful career is because I had a very high hockey IQ, like meaning like I was very smart. So as a result of that, I clashed with a lot of coaches, and I tell kids all the time now, right? Like telling your coach like that you're smarter than them or this is stupid all the time or whatever is just a horrible idea. Now, even if your coach is the dumbest coach in the world, make your coach think that you think that they're smart, right? Like, not to say that like you need to go necessarily like suck up to your coach every day, but like make your coach think that you like them, because at the end of the day, right? Like, unless you're the Connor McDavid, Sidney Crosby, where your skill level is so different, it doesn't matter. Like, there's a lot of 50-50 decisions on who he wants to play here, who's going to play how much. And like, no matter what people say, it's like just the way we're wired as humans. If they really like this person and not like the other, and the skill sets are similar, they're going to choose that person. I think that applies to everything we do now, like whether it's your boss in business and like, you know what I mean? I try and like tell people like your boss has two people who they're thinking about promoting who are similar skill levels. One, they think like really respects them, and the other one tells them that their ideas are shit every day. Like, who are they going to promote? Right. Yes. So I think that that's probably where I started going wrong in a lot of situations. And I think that, like I said, that's like, I try and tell kids all the time that like, make your coach believe that, like, you know what I mean? You trust them. You think that they're smart, and just be willing to at least listen to them without giving your opinion all the time. And that was something that I didn't do very well.
And I think it's important. And I appreciate you sharing that, because again, I've been there. I think every athlete gets to that point where they're like, seriously, like, what are we doing? And I remember my like senior year of high school playing baseball, right? I mean, that coach, I'm glad he was out there, I guess, but I didn't have a ton of respect for him. But that aside, it's, I think, important, like, how do you react, right? How do you have different conversations and how do you prepare yourself to have a more mature conversation, right? Not saying you didn't do that, but like as approaching these things, it's like you can approach your coach in a way that, end of the day, doesn't make them feel stupid, because that's what we're really getting at, right? Like, we're threatened or
well, yeah, and that's the thing, right? It's like, as if you're going to have like, I mean, you know, from all your success, but like, you're going to have a bunch of coaches. Some you're going to respect more than others, some you're not. But it's like the coaches that you don't respect, how are you going to handle that?
Yeah.
Like, just basically what you just said. Like, are you going to go in, argue with them every day, or are you going to keep your mouth shut, work hard, move on to the next thing, right? So I think that, like, how you approach those situations is something that I just handled horribly, and something I really try and stress with young kids and players and kind of anyone who's in my circles now. It's just like, there's a better way to go about that. Trust me.
Well, it's interesting because you reminded me of a couple discussions I've had with some NHL guys lately, and it's coach. I'm making a generalization, of course, but when you have a coach, the coach, you have to understand, is trying to win games, right? Trying to be successful. And I think, to your point of like, you have to start there, right? If like, same thing is like, if a coach yells at you, they care. Well, same thing is true. This coach is trying to figure out the strategy to the best of their ability. You have to start there, and at least have that understanding. You don't have to agree, but then like, how do you have that discussion with them of like, hey, you know, coach, I've seen it this way, or have you thought about it that way? Or like, you know, can we have a mature discussion about it where, because I care too about winning. And a lot of these NHL guys with the right coach, like, coaches will ask players, like, what do you think? What's working? What's not? Like, that openness to it, which is, well, it depends, but.
Yeah, not to like jump topics, but I think like if you look at the NHL, right, like teams the best 10 years, like Tampa Bay Lightning have kind of like wrote the script on how to be successful. And something that always sticks out to me is early in his career, John Cooper, who like never played hockey and stuff, was asked a question on like CNBC during like one of the finals, and they asked him about a play in the game, and his answer was, you know, and I'm very fortunate. I have some of the best players in the world. So a lot of times when I don't really see a play or might see it differently, I ask some of the best players in the league what they think. And I'm very fortunate as a coach that I get to pick their opinion. And I was like mind blown by this for so many reasons. One is I feel like a lot of coaches, like, they're in the Stanley Cup finals, they're on national TV, have way too big of an ego to be like, okay, like, I have some of the best players. Like, I asked them. And I feel like the reason he's been able to have so much success for a guy who never played hockey, whatever, is he's able to find a way to just basically lead these group of people kind of, I mean, so much from the X and O standpoint, especially at like in hockey, like, isn't that much different, right? Like, most teams in NHL are forechecking the same. Like, yes, of course, there's a couple tweaks here and there. But I feel like the coaches who are able to have the most success are these guys who are able to kind of elevate the play of every single person on their roster. And it's just been remarkable to kind of see the success that he's had. But that's just kind of a memory that I have, speaking on the alternative side of that, of just amazing coaching on kind of watching what he's been able to do and why he's been able to do it.
That's such a great point, because it's, again, I know there's athletes listening to this who are at the high school level, collegiate level, pro level, all that sort of stuff, right? There's coaches listening to this as well at different stages of their career. But I think it's such an important point, right? Of, you have a lot of smart people around you as well from a coaching perspective that you can rely on, and which is the players, of like asking them what they think and what's working, what's not. I think it's such a, yeah, to your point, I think sometimes and I felt this way too, right? As a coach of like literally, 10-year-old soccer, it's like, well, I got to have the answer. And so maybe that's a little drastic.
Yeah, and then it even goes though on the contrary, right? Like I always think too, like the good coaches and the really smart coaches are able to like be well liked by the majority of their players. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, right, every player is not going to like them. Some are going to play more. But like if you get your core and best players to like you, if you have an average season and all those players go into their exit meetings and the GMs and owners are like, what do you guys think of the coach? Well, if you're well liked, even if you guys had a bad year, they're going to go to bat for you. Whereas, like, if you have bad relationships with all your players, you have a bad year, then these players go in for their exit meeting and everyone is pissed off. They're going to be like, get this guy out of here. So I think that, like, coming back to just, like, being a good guy, even on the coaching standpoint, right, is, like, obviously you're going to have successful years and non-successful years. But I think that some coaches are able to have longer careers just because they're able to have the support of their best players.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. So true. And it's how do you develop ultimately as a leader, right? And you read the best leadership books like you're talking about, and that's coaching too, right? And being a great teammate, but it's relying on those around you. It's asking questions. It's just having this genuine curiosity of like, how do we make this work? And sometimes I have to ask questions of my best players to make that happen.
Yeah. And I think too, just like going out of your way to show those players that like you care about them as people, I think is something that's a little bit overrated. And people say like, oh, it's professional sports, but so no one does that. But certain coaches do that. I think go above and beyond to kind of show players that and kind of gain the trust from their players.
Yes, absolutely. This is so good. This is so good. Anything else on the mental side that kind of stuck out to you in your career? Things you did well or things you wanted to improve that you see like either players you represent dealing with today or even kids today coming up?
Yeah, I think that an interesting point that someone brought up to me recently is I, in my mind, turned professional at 13 years old. Like I was not getting paid at 13 years old, but like in my head, I was a pro hockey player. I was living like a pro hockey player. So when I retired at the age of 30, it had kind of been like most people would say, oh, I had like a 10 or 11 year career based off of when, but it felt more like 20 years to me. But there's certain guys who are able to like have more fun with the game longer before it really turns into like a job. So like other guys, like I know like one of my buddies who played till he was 38, he's like, I didn't really feel like I was a pro until I was 22 years old. Right. So I think that something just for kids in general to be careful about, and that's not to say like you shouldn't work hard and stuff. It's a mental thing, right? Like, it's like I said, kind of getting back to like some kids are shooting 1,000 pucks in their driveway every day because they love doing it and it's fun to them. I was shooting 1,000 pucks in my driveway because I was like, I have to do this to make the NHL. And that's what I was doing at 13. So I think that in like kind of the same thing with working out, right? Like we were talking about, some guys love getting in there and like working out every day. But like I was working out every day because in my head, I was like, I have to work out every day to make the NHL. So I think that kind of like delaying that mindset to being a full-time pro or just being able to like have fun with it longer, if you're going to play professional sports for a long time, I think can be very beneficial. And then, I mean, I touched on it earlier, but I think just it's hard in sports, but like guys who are like the most successful guys, I feel like are able to kind of find a way to be even keeled through good and bad times and not be all over the kind of all over the map.
Love that. I think that it's interesting, Drew, because now we were talking before, this is interview 23, right, of this series that we started, not too long ago. And one thing that is a theme popping up with all the pro athletes and Olympians that I talk to is just what you said. And I won't say fun, but the love of the process, the love of the game. It's like they do it because they love it, not because they have to. And
exactly. And I felt like doing it because like it's going to eventually turn into have to, but like some people are able to keep like their first 10 years of their pro career before it switched to have to. I was kind of in the have to at like 15 years old. So I think that is something that, like you said, I think is spot on. And a lot of those guys know exactly what they're talking about. I think that that's huge.
Yeah. But I think with those players too, it's also this curiosity of like, they're just genuinely interested about like, if I take 1,000 shots a day, what's that going to do? And I don't know, but they're like, ooh, like this is interesting, right? And again, their goal is there, right? I want to get to the NHL or stay, have a illustrious, like long career. Yeah, that's the goal. But they're like, oh man, like, oh, if I tweak this, tweak that, do this, do that, like this is interesting. Or the X's and O's and the strategy. Like I don't know if you remember the name Jason Terry, basketball player.
Yeah, he was the basketball guy.
Yeah,
I'm an NBA super fan. So yeah, it's Gary Terry.
So 19 years in the NBA, right? And he talked about that. He goes, I took hundreds of shots a day, but I needed to do that. He goes, I love basketball. He went on. He went off. He's like, I love the strategy. I love practice. I love the X's and O's. I love games. I love all that stuff. And he said, I also love my routine. And I knew I needed to take those shots because when I walked in that locker room, my team would know I'm prepared to help the team win tonight, whether we won or lost. And it goes back to that love of just enjoying like what you're doing. Otherwise, good Lord, like nothing in life is worth it at some point.
I think your curiosity point is really cool. And I think that's something you see now, like with the best players, like they're always like open to like trying like a little bit something different. Like they're basically like waking up every day and they have a team of people waking up every day. Like, how can I get a little bit better? And I mean, I think it's cool to see like these young athletes who are just so committed to it and literally are willing to try anything in the world possible, from like eating this to not eating that to sleeping here to sleeping on that. Like, just it's cool to see how like innovative these guys have become and just like their desire to get like, because I mean, let's be honest, like in the like it's a 0.0003% difference, right? And maybe performance or how they feel, but I mean that's a huge difference for a lot of these guys and what makes them so successful.
It's so true. That's so amazing. Yeah, the one thing I'm finding is the secrets to success are not really secrets, right? It's just how do you have these core, which is everything you're talking about, of the love of the game, right? And enjoyment. And because of that, you're willing to do the work that others aren't willing to do. And when you do that, assuming you've got a base level of talent, of course, right? That chances are you're going to separate yourself from other people and have the opportunity to go, hopefully achieve your dream and do that next thing. But it's kind of sticking with the basics, really, when you really think about it.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, I mean, like having a love for what you're doing, like working as hard as you can and continually getting better, I think kind of regardless, you're going to find yourself at the top.
So good. Drew, I'll be aware of your time here because I know you have, a bunch of meetings and work to do and all that sort of stuff now, and in your role representing players. And I just can't thank you enough for taking the time with me today. And I'm looking forward to our next conversation, hopefully in person, because we're in the same city, for goodness sake. So
yeah, let's get together. I'd love it. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate having me on. It's cool to listen to what you guys are doing here and just kind of helping young athletes. Because like I said, I mean, I think that was kind of the biggest thing that prevented me from having the career that I probably should have had. And I think that that's something that I try and help guys with now. And there's more and more people like yourself who are starting to have resources and stuff available for these kids and these athletes. And anything I can do to help you guys, let me know.
I appreciate it so much. Well, for all of you watching, listening right now, please make sure you share this episode with all your hockey friends, hockey family, hockey coaches, and people outside of hockey as well. Because one thing I've learned through sports is, we may be on different playing surfaces, but we're dealing with the same challenges, right? Very similar. And so we can help each other along the way too. So please share this. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. We will give you all the connections to hook up with Drew on Instagram and X and all that sort of stuff as well. So please check the notes to this interview, and we will see you all on the next interview. Thanks so much.